now move into introducing you to our special guest who we've brought here today.
In the newness of spring, we often associate it with green, with young, with youth. There's a Jungian saying, Carl Jung, called the core, and that is the eternal ingenue, the eternal maiden, the core. And so, who is aligned from mythology with spring? She is the eternal core. It is Persephone who we're having join us today. Maybe you've heard her name. She has many symbols. And she'll be with us today, carrying the metaphor, helping you speak into your spring and the dualities that all of us experience if we're paying attention and doing our work. We live in many dualities, just as Persephone does and what she represents.
So if you'll set your branches aside for right now and kind of clear space, we're going to, Bethany and I are going to introduce you more to Persephone, but first we're going to get started on our next art making. I find that keeping my hands busy sometimes creates the space for what we call depth work, where kind of like these blossoms that we made, there are a lot of layers to us, and some of us have things on the surface that are very apparent and our thinking brain likes to be very active with. But it can sometimes mean that we don't fully engage the other layers, the deeper parts that are also part and parcel of who we are. And so a lot of the art making that we're doing here is not so much about making great art, although I hope you make stuff you like and enjoy. But what today is really about is making art that begins to let those depths of ourselves come out, those depths speak. And so sometimes if our thinking brain is busy listening and engaging in the conversation, and our art making brain and our soul and our emotions can be doing the art making, then I find very often we can be surprised by what comes out. And I'll show you later, as I was kind of preparing, doing this activity that we're about to do. I did it once before, and some of the things that came out, I was very surprised by. They were not what I thought going in. Oh, I'm going to make it like this. And so we just ask that you stay as open as possible and that you bring as few expectations of how it's going to turn out as possible, and that you really just try to flow with whatever your intuition says to do. So speaking of intuition, we asked you to bring some magazine pages. If you didn't get a chance to do it, it's okay. We'll have time for that. But hopefully you just didn't think too hard about what to get. You just pulled images that spoke to you with some of the prompts that I gave you. So start by pulling out, if you brought a file folder, pull that out. If you don't have a file folder, just 2 pieces of paper or cardstock will work. Mat board is good. But we're going to orient it so it's vertical. So that one side is on top of the other. And these are going to be our substrate for our project. Bethany made the point the other day that you might want a thicker substrate. So you could do 2 things. You could either put a thicker, or you can do a number of things actually. You can put a thicker paper kind of there to double it up and just glue that on. If you have another file folder, you could just staple or glue them together and then use the inside. Or I'll show you the back of my collage. I just glued all this thick, ugly, extra paper, especially like the covers of my magazines, to the back of it. You see the file folder, but here hanging off the ends, you see I just glued all this thicker stuff to it so that it would make it a little bit more solid. So feel free to do any of those if you want it thicker. It doesn't have to be thick. The file folder is fine on its own, but if you want it to kind of
Mhm.
be a little sturdier, those are some choices.
We've
Um,
seen this type of collage hung, and so I like to have a little thickness so that if I want to put a tack or a little nail and hang it in my office, just as a reminder and to hold that energy and to keep that energy fresh in my mind. Sometimes I'll light a candle in front of it. So that's just another way to keep holding on to this and use it. And that's why sometimes I like it thicker. You can also glue. I take in the magazines all the advertisement pages that I'll never use, and it's a nice way to not add something into recycling or something else, but if you wanna put those as the thickening, you can too.
mhm, mhm. And also, I would recommend that you keep that journal or that piece of paper that you may have written some things down on earlier. Just keep it on hand. Um, if a word that is spoken strikes you, you don't have to understand why. Just write it down, because maybe at the end of today, or when you revisit it on the replay, or you just decide to make more blossoms on your branches and want to look at what we did, um, those words might stand out to you, and be something that speaks to you, not even today or tomorrow, but maybe next week, next month, next year, even. So, um, just however you like to take notes, there's no test or grade, but just so you remember the things of today that are important. I always like to say, that the words that are true and worthwhile will sink like the seeds into the soil, and everything else will just be like the chaff that blows away, the dust that it just. So whatever today is dust, let it blow away. But if there is something for you that is a germ of something that can grow, that's what we want you to hold on to.
Mm.
So yeah. So when you have the file folder, that's what you're going to be building two separate collages on.
Mhm.
Now, I say collage and you may feel stressed out. This is what we call an intuitive collage. Just go with the first thing that strikes you. It's going to be pretty fast. Now, you can always take your time and then finish up later. Either watch the replay and see how we tell you to do it, or just remember kind of the steps, or pause at each step and then put it all together later when you feel done. But there is a value in doing work that you don't think too hard about.
Mhm.
I love detail, and I get lost in detail. And with collage, I love to cut out teeny tiny little things, but sometimes there is a value in being a little looser and messier, because that's when we can be surprised by
Mhm.
things. Um,
Yeah, the energy comes out. It's kind of like a test. Go with your gut, don't go back and change it.
yeah.
Don't go back and change your image. If there's something, and even if it's repulsing you, collect that image, because that's an archetype, that's an energy, and it might come in handy today.
The first half of your collage is going to kind of be your springtime.
Mhm.
And we're going to talk about Persephone and why that's the springtime. So, um, on the top half is going to be spring. So, whatever that means, and not just, I mean, yes, go full on gardens and blossoms, but also we're going to take a moment before Bethany and I start telling you about Persephone for you to really consider, what is my springtime? What does this season in my life mean? Um, what is beginning to grow? Not in full harvest yet, not in the abundance of summer, lush and full, but what maybe is beginning? What is new? What is fresh? Or you may be more nostalgic. Who have I been when I was fresh, when I was new? And where is she now? Where is that new me now? Am I still new? Am I still fresh? Or do I want to remember back to her? And then your second one is going to kind of be the underside of that, the soil, the winter, the underground, that effort I was talking about, of what is at work below the surface.
Mm.
What is happening maybe in the shadow, in the unseen. We often associate springtime with engagement and going outside, and so often we're more social because there's more light. So maybe the opposite is, what is my more isolated self? What is my more reflective, quiet self? What is my internal life a little bit? So whatever of that strikes you, start building your collage, glue it down, just try to keep it so it can still fold, because that will be part of what we're doing.
So we're going to read to you the myth of Persephone. Um, Persephone is the beautiful daughter of Zeus and Demeter. Demeter is another way you'll hear her name, the goddess of grain. One day, while she was picking flowers with her companions, Artemis and Athena, in one version of the story, Hades burst forth from the earth in a golden chariot, seized the girl, and carried her off to his palace in the underworld. In the modern retelling of Greek myths, it is common to portray Hades as evil, but this is absolutely not present in ancient myths. Though he was gloomy and frightening as a god, the ancients never saw Hades as evil. He wasn't responsible for human death or suffering. He was charged with shepherding the souls once they left their bodies. And so, out of respect and in awe for his position, he was rarely depicted in art because he was kind of a taboo, and because he was taboo, or death was taboo, they weren't really creating images of him either. He's no more villainous than any of the other ancient abductors. I think Hades was rather more noble. In fact, many wrote that Persephone accepted him because a couple of the other gods they had many affairs and didn't really respect their wives, and their wives were often left at home. And women at the time, they could run a home, but many of them found themselves bored, and she didn't want that life for her. And so she was kind of excited when Hades came and kidnapped her, and she had some time to think about it and take her into the underworld. Zeus, by the way, gave permission for Hades. Hades said, "Hey, I like this lady. I think it's time for me to get married." And he said, "Okay," but he did not tell Demeter that he was giving permission for his daughter, or for her daughter, to be married. And part of that is because he knew that Demeter would try and stop it. She would try and run interference. Because once they were married, where was Persephone going to go live? She wasn't going to live up on Middle Earth or up on the earth. She was going to have to go down into the underworld with Mr. Hades. So she goes under, and when Demeter discovered what had happened to her, her grief was so huge and so great that it caused a winter. It caused a freeze, and it blighted the soil, and the first winter happened. Now, some myths say that this actually lasted 3 years, where people were starving, and the gods were pleading with her, saying, "Hey, we're losing all of our worshipers. We're losing all of our people." So they were trying to speak sense into her, but she was devastated without her daughter. They had a very entwined relationship. So she created this first winter out of her grief. She was rageful that her daughter had been taken for her. It was purposeful. She destroyed the earth. She was angry that her daughter had been taken down, and so she was holding the world hostage. She kept ordering her daughter returned, and Zeus declined. Demeter's name is related to the word for mother, Mutter, and that's a big part of her identity. What had happened, though, is that Persephone began to see how important the underworld was and began to connect with some of the meaning that she could carry in this damp, quiet, dark place. Once the souls crossed the first river, they would lose memory of the other world. They would lose memory of who they were before. And so she began to find that she could soothe them and tend to them and guide them and help them find peace in the afterlife. She found purpose. She gets the call from Hermes and said, "Yo, your mom is killing everything. You got to come back up because this lady is devastated. And it's a wreck. And we got to figure something out." And by then, Persephone was kind of torn because as much as she loved spring and the bloom, she was actually picking a daffodil or a narcissus, is what it's written when Hades came and took her. She'd actually found a purpose and meaning in this place where things are quiet, things are slow. There's a permanency in that place. So she was torn. She also hadn't eaten the entire time because if any of you are stressed, when you get stressed, some of you might get that bubbly stomach and you don't eat. Well, for Persephone, she had the bubbly stomach and she couldn't eat until Hermes is there and he's saying, "Yo, the world is a mess. It's crazy. Babies are dying. People are dying." And she'd been presented with a banquet table and she was so hungry she decided to give in. Does anybody know what she ate? Pomegranate.
Oh, cool.
She actually ate 4 seeds, which is why we have 4 seasons. I'll tell you about that. So she ate 4 seeds because she just needed a nibble for the long journey ahead.
I always
And
heard she ate 3, and that's why winter is 3 months.
Oh, unless you live in Texas or global warming,
Well, sure.
then winter's a month. So she goes back up and they go before Zeus, and Demeter's like, "You gave her away. I want my daughter." And Persephone says, I kind of like it down there. I found some freedom. I found a purpose. I don't belong to just my husband and I don't belong to just you. I'm finding myself. Here I am. This is kind of cool. And my husband is letting me be the queen. I'm not just a maiden. So she finds her voice. And they're pleading with Zeus. Hades says, "I want her, but I trust her voice." And that really warms Persephone's heart. And Zeus, in his wise mind, says, "Well, how many seeds did you eat?" And according to some of the stuff that Amy read, she said 3. And he said, "Fine. For 3 months out of the year, you will be down in the underworld. And when you come up, you'll be reunited with your mom, but you will have to go back down for 3 months out of the year." And that is why we have ta-da-da-da, spring and winter. That took a lot longer because I nerded out on way too many podcasts on Persephone. So thank you for listening because it is a lot of fun. I love
Well,
this.
she's always been one of my favorite. I remember we studied mythology in 7th grade English class, and my mother can attest, I got a little obsessed. We were given the opportunity, especially if you wanted some extra credit, to you could make a model of one of the Olympian thrones. And there were these descriptions of what all the thrones looked like. Well, I decided to make all 13. Persephone didn't have a throne in at Mount Olympus, but I read her story, and I used to draw costumes when I'd listen to a story or see a play. If I didn't like the costumes, I'd redesign it. And so I was drawing Persephone and Demeter and Hades and all these characters. And I got really focused on drawing her wedding ring. And I envisioned her wedding ring as this cluster of 3 rubies, but that looked kind of like pomegranate seeds. And when you looked closely, they were not rubies, they were embers from the hearth of Hades, from the stone hearth in the underworld. And so they always singed her. It was in my imagination, like, this was it the pain of love, the pain of separation, the pain of being torn between the world you have always known and then this new place. But it just really struck me, like, what if her ring, like, glowed this constant fire, this constant ember of this idea of seeing these characters and letting them take on a life of their own and speak to you is something I've loved to do for a long time. And it's a fun activity, but also when we let them have a little bit of room to breathe, like Bethany did in some of what she read and shared with us, they begin to speak to us at different stages of our life and different seasons that we're going through. And so that's what we wanted to invite Persephone here to do today, because most of the versions of this myth, you hear about Hades. Bethany talked a lot about Hades. You hear about Demeter. You hear about Zeus. You hear about who the messengers are, or, and there are all these different versions. And so 3 seeds, 4 seeds. But what you don't get very often is Persephone's words. And so
That's right.
Bethany and I wanted to go in and really consider not only who this woman would have been if she were real, if this were a real story, what would it have been like, but also to do that work on our own and say, what does this mean for me? What part of this story already is resonating?
Mm.
Is there a sense of separation you have from a place that you've known your whole life and you're no longer in? Can you imagine what it felt like to experience cold and barrenness for the first time? Or do you not have to imagine? Do you already know what that feels like, what that is like, because you've walked through that?
Mm.
What would it be like to go home after having been away in such a transformative experience?
Yep.
What does home feel like after that? What do colors look like? Has your perception of the world changed by what you've gone through? So it can be a myth. It can be a historical character. It can be a book character. It can be real or not. But what we want to do here is to let it be real for us for this moment, and to say, whether it's true or not, whether I believe it or whatever, that's not really the point. Right now, the point is, what is Persephone saying to me?
Mm.
So I'm going to turn the music back on and we're going to take a little bit of a break to get that template that we sent you, if you were able to print it out, to get that and gather your wax paper or tracing paper that you have. 'Cause
And
we're
a
gonna-
permanent marker.
Yes, because we're going to be working on that next. We're going to go into a little bit more about Persephone and just show you how to finish this project.